Muted.
Of the recordings about early next week, which is great for those who want to review the slides and things like that after the fact. But to start things off, I'm going to jump straight in and take a look at the following question, which is going to be, what's the biggest challenge logistics providers currently face? And what we did is we asked 130 logistics executives and 110 of their customers on questions surrounding this specific topic. So according to logistics service providers, in fact, the biggest threat that they found in the industry is actually each other. So as you can see, their competitors is their biggest threat. Coming up second was stagnant global growth, which is somewhat surprising given the fact that stagnant global growth is something that affects everyone, whereas looking at competitors is sort of looking over one's shoulder rather than looking at the whole spectrum of things taking place in the industry. So the other surprising thing, of course, of the study is that that's also where the industry gained most of their new business over the last 12 months. LSPs gain most of their business from outbidding or winning contracts from each other. So LSPs are at once each other's biggest threats, but also each other's biggest sources for new business. So where does that place them in terms of looking at the future? So moving forward, LSPs are conscious of the fact that they can't rely on taking each other's business as a long-term growth model. Instead, they're going to have to rely on innovation to break this chain by providing new services and products to their customers to grow their business. So given that, where does innovation stand then within logistics providers? How good are they at innovating? Well, unfortunately, innovation is not necessarily one of their strong suits. So here we ask logistics providers to self-rank themselves in terms of where they felt they stood in terms of innovation. As you can see, most of them actually would describe themselves as late majority adopters or laggards. Only 5% saw themselves as being on the cutting edge in that sort of innovator space. So that leaves us with, where do the customers feel in all of this? And they were actually in a similar sort of light in terms of how they found their logistics providers in terms of providing innovation, new ideas, solutions, etc. Most of them were not happy with how their logistics providers were providing them with this type of service. So that begs the question, how are logistics providers going to innovate to drive growth in the next 18 months? And the struggle to innovate clearly represents one of the biggest challenges LSPs face in the coming months as commoditization pressures margins and growth, etc., impact the industry. And they're going to have to improve how they innovate. So what are they actually doing? So things are actually starting to change. So we actually asked the industry as a whole, so that includes manufacturers, retailers, etc., if they have an innovation center at their organization. And the majority said yes. Even if you looked at just logistics providers, though, just under half of them have a team responsible for innovation. So what are they using their innovation centers for? Well, the primary driver is the creation of new solutions is by far the greatest priority for those innovation centers, with differentiation between themselves and competition coming up second. But they're already starting to see ROI from it, which is quite interesting, as you can see through this chart here. So on that note, we're going to be speaking with one such LSP that has implemented a dedicated innovation lab. Matt McClelland is Innovation Research Manager at Kenco Innovation Labs, and he'll be speaking in just a minute. But I'm going to first hand things over to Danny Halim, who's VP of Wholesale Distribution and 3PL Industry Strategy at JDA, to kick things off next. Danny, over to you.
Thanks, Ali. Let me figure out how to share this a second here. My screen, show my screen. Can you confirm you can see my full screen?
All good.
All good, thank you. So hello everyone, my name is Danny Halim. I look after our distribution and 3PL industry strategy and best practices in JDA. And I'll spend a few minutes to talk about our point of views and our sort of recommendations for the industry. about innovations in the 3PL industry and how we think the innovation is going to deliver value for the customers, for the shippers. And hopefully it will trigger some discussions and set the stage for Matt to showcase some of the exciting stuff that Kenco is doing as well. And so before I go to the more detailed coverage from the point of view, just a little bit of introduction about JDA, just in case everyone's not familiar with JDA. So over the past 30 years, I think we've been growing through series of acquisitions and merger, and in the past several years, we've actually successfully delivered an integrated solution for all of those solutions that we've acquired and consolidated. And we actually come up with what we call a converged solution set across our solutions, from planning all the way to supply chain execution. In net, we have over 4,000 customers globally. We're a global company. We have 70 locations globally, so we have local resources, experts that can help anyone around the world. But I think what's more relevant for this webinar is the set of customers that we have in the 3PL industry. We have over 200 of customers in the third-party logistics and the logistics services, and I think and about 8 out of the top 10 global 3PLs actually use JDA. So I want to give you with that perspective in mind. Just maybe one thing that worth to point out. Again, we've been growing over the past 30 years, including capabilities that we acquire from a variety of companies such as Red Prairie, I2 Technologies, and Managed Logistics, just in case everyone's still not familiar with the brand JDA. But what I want to take you next is speaking about innovation. So I saw the data, obviously, that Halim did explain earlier, and so let me take you to this view here, right? So what you see here, this is an eye chart. I'm not going to go through every single box here, but what you see that in the past 30 years in logistics, there are some that call it, well, today's logistics is not your grandfather's 3PL anymore, because it's different. Truly, before the year 2000, a lot of the activities, a lot of the efforts to develop logistics practices have been all about providing that services, have been all about delivering that execution services to the customers, to the shippers. So there are many different strategies or initiatives being developed, being executed, all the way to supporting global multinational companies with their offshoring, nearshoring again, providing capabilities such as track and trace, especially in the pharmaceutical or in the perishable industry, and also developing value-added services, which we still see today as one of the trends that continue to increase to add value to the customers. But I think what's more interesting is that what about today, right? If you see today, the conversations and the values being delivered are no longer just about the services and the execution services that are being provided by the 3PL companies. The 3PL companies now provide far more capabilities today than in the past. So when we see the number before, not so much on the innovation, and innovation has not been delivering growth, I do think that innovation has been happening in the 3PL industry. Now, perhaps it is a matter of maybe the customers are not seeing or not realizing the values just yet. So that's a conversation that we should have with the customers, among all of us in the industry, how to better position innovation to the customers, to the shippers. But innovation has been happening, in fact, and you can see here on the chart, right? We see 3PLs and news about 3PLs, not just prototyping, but actually rolling out capabilities such as, obviously, robotics and automation to increase their productivity, to increase their speed, to service the market, especially when it gets to the e-commerce. We see logistics providers that are providing almost full-service omni-channel services, taking an inventory, servicing their customers' e-commerce websites directly, all the way to even providing 3D printing services. And I think it's almost natural as companies now are actually moving more near-shoring, or I would call it near-market services, providing that final finishing or personalization that are necessary. And so these technologies are, no longer, in my opinion, just buzzwords. They're real. They're becoming even more practical today. Obviously, and still in pockets. Some of them are being prototyped, but they're real. I think they will promise value either in the near future or in the long run. But we need to keep an eye on this. We need to embrace some of this, and there's a great deal of value that can be delivered here. So that's my opinion about innovation. It is happening. Some of them are quite disruptive. In fact, so I'll give you an example. Like, for example, in the next slide here, a disruptive model of innovation is the Uberization of logistics. I know that's a word that not many people want to hear, but it is happening globally, starting from locally and expanding, from New York City all the way to Southeast Asia. And if you think about, if you look at the picture on the very right-hand side, this company called Gojek, very fast-growing company in Southeast Asia. In fact, in Indonesia, its growth is driven because the traffic in the city and people spend hours and hours trying to get the products and services that they need, and motorcycles are the best and most agile method of transportation in many of the major cities. And so this company, Gojek, capitalized on that. They were able to get over 200,000 drivers. And remember, the company doesn't even have an asset, but 200,000 drivers that are providing services, whether it's to pick up food or products or courier service and others. And so that's an exciting thing that's happening. It's quite disruptive, but we need to think about, whether this model and how this model can be integrated into our future offering as well as part of our future innovations. And obviously there are some other ways that majority of the 3PL companies continue to innovate and differentiate and deliver value to their customers, whether it's the increased number of offerings that they offer to the customers, so it becomes more of a full service provider. They provide specialized services that truly obviously differentiate them, whether it's in the high tech and the pharmaceutical industry, for example, or they differentiate by providing special expertise. So, for example, supply chain analytics or supply chain planning capabilities, and and we've seen that happening in many of the leading 3PLs, providing that ability, that taking in more and more capabilities of supply chain beyond just the execution services, but all the way to getting involved with the customer's supply chain strategy in their path to grow, expand, and deliver value. And that leads us to this slide here. Obviously, and definitely, indeed, I see leading 3PLs to find ways to differentiate by forming tighter strategic relationship, as I mentioned before, beyond just the execution services that typically where many of the logistics services begin their journey with their customers, but taking on more and more role in their customers' businesses. So, expansion or new market penetration and or whatever else, but getting more involved in beyond just the warehousing and transportation, but getting more involved in actually their manufacturing strategy, getting more involved in their sourcing strategy, getting more involved in the overall supply chain processes, even all the way down to managing inventory, perhaps, right? So those are some examples that I wanted to highlight. And along with that, I think the leading companies, they also leverage emerging technologies, as we talked about earlier, to really change the value propositions. And this is very important, and I think Matt McClelland is going to show some real practical examples of this. But the value proposition is no longer just about being able to move a product from one place to the customer, right? But it's actually about how can we be more agile? How can we can deliver that service or enable that service to be more flexible as well as the customer changes or their customer's customer changes? Can they quickly respond to those changes and deliver value? So so that's the question. Can technology, in the right way, in the right assessment, obviously, deliver faster, better, and safer? So you see some examples of this. So we're thinking from JDA perspective, working with a number of these leading companies around what we call, how to build a warehouse of the future, right? A warehouse that is not just about storing products anymore, but also providing that value-added services and capabilities, and far more agile than what it is today. What if we can incorporate the new kind of warehouse associate, which robot, an associate in the future in the warehouse, working hand in hand with the personnel in the warehouse together to add value, right, to deliver value. And so so these are some examples that actually are being researched, being prototyped, and in many cases being rolled out as well. You see a picture of the smart glasses on the top right-hand corner, for example. This is obviously not a buzzword. It's not just a gadget anymore. In some cases, it is being rolled out because think about the applicability of it to help warehouse workers, especially the new ones, to quickly ramp up their productivity, reducing the training time, and improving accuracy, especially for the newer and younger generation workforce in the warehouse. Here's another example of what we can do with technology, right? So if you think about pallet building, simple tasks from a high-level perspective, but what if we can help like as I mentioned earlier, a newer, younger generation of workforce to just do it right the first time, and not having to make errors in the way they build pallets that become really dangerous or inefficient, but just try to guide them using visual. No longer just about the voice, because sometimes I experience it myself, right? With somebody gives me direction, I still sometimes do it wrong because I just don't get the visual. But what if we give them the visual to how to do things the right way the first time? There's a lot of opportunity to impact productivity, to impact accuracy, and think about the impact to the bottom line. If you can just save even 15 minutes or 20 minutes of their time in a day, and you multiply that by the number of people that you have in the warehouse for the whole entire year, and it's actually quite significant, and the ROI is actually quite obvious there. Some of the leading logistics companies work with us also on their data science to build the data science as a company, how to use data to increase their agility. So think about the perspective of the example of if you have the truck that is ready to go, but you foresee that there's going to be weather problem or traffic problem, perhaps you want to change the schedule or the routes, and you want to be able to do that automatically without having to wait for someone to do that, right? What if you could sense all that information from the internet? And there are actually many data providers out there, but being able to take in all of this data and create an intelligent prescriptive responses back to the people that will actually execute the plan, I think it's going to be interesting. And like I said again, technology is already here, and it's a matter of adopting it, and and I think the value is going to be obvious. And so that is practically what we focus on doing with from JDA perspective, is how can we help the leading companies, the leading providers work with their customers better and create a much more flexible and agile supply chain and offering, but being able to to connect the innovations that they're launching, whether it is on the data science area, or the technology area, or from a process innovation perspective, but offering that ability to essentially create an intelligent hub, a digital hub of all of this information and processes, and deliver an orchestrated execution back to the execution, whether it's in the form of direction or plan or a schedule to the warehouse management, to the warehouse control system, all the way to the transportation management solution. So I guess I'll hand it over to Matt in a minute here. I will just say, let's explore it together. I want to introduce to you that the concept, the team in JDA that we call the JDA Labs, and you can see some of the screenshots here, some of the really cool things that they're doing. And again, I want to stress out, it's not innovation to find problem, but it's actually the other way around. This team that we have in the JDA Labs are very smart people that they listen to our customers, and they try to find creative ways to solve problems, whether it's using data science or it's using design or using other tools and technologies that are already available in the market, but all of them designed to provide significant value back to the customers. Okay, with that, I will just finish with a recommendation and a call to action, perhaps as well. From JDA perspective, we have a white paper that I think it's a pretty good read that could give you some recommendations, some ideas where to go next. This white paper provides you with some recommended steps to how to assess your capability, identify perhaps gaps that exist, that are opportunistic as well, but also how to build that innovation platform, and also some recommendations around building that partnership. Partnership is very important because I think it's very difficult for anyone in the industry to try to innovate alone, right? I think partnership is very critical as we collect the thoughts and the ideas and the best practices, lessons learned from others, and we can collect them and come up with a good idea that is practical and can be executed in future. So that is all what I want to share with you. Hopefully it didn't take too much of time for Matt to show some really cool practical things that Kenco is doing. So with that, is it going to Matt or Halim?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I will hand things over to Matt. And just to reiterate what Danny said, we will be sharing all of the material after the webinar with the recordings, with the EFT research, and with JDA's white paper. Keep your questions coming, but on that note, I will hand things over to Matt. Matt?
Great. Can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. And this is my presentation on screen.
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Thanks. So thanks for attending the webinar. My name is Matt McClelland. My title is Innovation Research Manager at Kenco Innovation Labs. We're a third-party logistics provider, customers of JDA, and I want to take a little bit of time to tell you a little bit about what we're doing and our approach to some of the things that Halim and Danny have talked about today. So innovation, that's why we're here. And we like to think that we're a company that's been involved in innovation for a long time, but we decided 2 years ago to take a little bit different approach to it. So what I want to talk about in the little bit of time that I have with you today is what is it, what are we doing with innovation, and maybe what are some of the things that you can do. I want to spend just a couple of minutes framing innovation from our concept. We think it's a very overused word, and you can't pick up a copy of the Wall Street Journal or any industry trade magazine without seeing the word innovation. And we feel like at Kenco, words are important. They need to mean something. And so one of the first things we decided to do when we started an innovation lab was we needed to define it, and not just define it in terms of what it means in the big picture, but define it in the sense of what it means to logistics, because I think our definition of innovation, as you'll see in a minute, is different than what Tim Cook and Apple uses as the word innovation. So this was one of the definitions that we sort of researched. solutions that meet new requirements or unarticulated needs. And this was great. This is the foundation of ultimately what we use to define innovation, which is the implementation of ideas in order to create new business value. Because let's face it, unless you're actually implementing ideas and creating business value, innovation is just sort of fun and whimsical, but it doesn't really do anything. So at Kenco, we like to say talk is cheap. When we talk about innovation, we decided to put our money where our mouth is, and we started something called Kenco Innovation Labs. Kenco Innovation Labs is not unique. Companies have had innovation labs for a long time, and as we started looking into this, I put together this screen that just sort of shows some of the other people that are both in our space, but also look at Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. This was their innovation lab back in the 1960s, which is responsible for basically modern air travel today. Microsoft, Lego, DHL, Amazon, these are all innovation labs that we've all heard of. But what is an innovation lab? What do we do? Of course, there's gadgets, right? And that's the coolest thing. And we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail in a minute. But I wanted to show this slide because one of the things we get excited about in innovation are small ideas and small changes. And I do a longer presentation on innovation sometimes, and I present this slide and I ask people to tell me what's innovative about this. And nobody generally ever gets it. But the answer here is Burger King moved the Coke machine from behind the counter to the other side of the counter so that customers could get involved with a simple task of creating their own soft drink. What that does is it reduces labor costs for Burger King. They don't have to do it anymore. It eliminates real estate and congestion behind the counter. It also gives the customer something to do while they're waiting for their food. And so this is a perfect example of the innovative ideas that we like to try to identify in our warehouse situations that don't actually cost any money. This is an idea that, and we like to look for ideas that are inexpensive and sort of no-brainers, and this is an example of one of them. But let's talk about a little bit more about what we do. What does Kenco do in our innovation lab? Ultimately, everything that we do falls into one of these three categories: research, prototyping, or education. And specifically, in my role as the innovation research manager, as I research, and I do a lot of reading. This is an example of some of the things that I read on a daily or a weekly or a monthly basis. As you see, these are trade journals that each of you are probably familiar with, including EFT, Inbound Logistics, the Wall Street Journal. These are all things that I use initially to sort of get some ideas from. Some of the ideas that we've kind of been working through lately are ideas and concepts with something called gamification, which is the introduction of game theory or competition into your warehouse, where you could incentivize and motivate people in different sorts of ways to reduce that industry turnover that we would all like to get down. I believe Danny and I were talking just before this presentation, and I think for warehousing it's around 35–40% of turnover on an annual basis, and we think that with gamification and introducing some competition into the warehouse that through measurable techniques and software that we'll be able to reduce this number. We're also looking at IoT, which is the Internet of Things inside the warehouse, and this is the idea of using sensors to gather data and be able to present information to management and to users in a way that is much more exciting and different and relevant, and hopefully with a stronger ROI. I could talk for hours about this, but I just wanted to present this slide and show you this is one of the main things that we're working on. We're also looking at the idea of automation, and this has typically been difficult for 3PLs to embrace, not because it's not a great idea, but our contracts generally are written on 1 to 3 year basis, and the infrastructure investment sometimes that takes or is required to make these pay off don't exist within the frame of a 3-year contract. And so there's changes taking place right now with a lot of these automation providers that I think are going to make this a lot more accessible. This is just an example of some of the projects that we're working on. 3D printing, gamification, which we've already talked about, augmented reality, which I'll talk about in a minute, robotics. Down here at the bottom, I'm going to talk about a little bit later on about an accelerator and what we're doing to work with new startup companies to get some new exciting ideas into the logistics space. But ultimately, this is the fun stuff, right? The research ultimately turns into prototyping. This is where you can actually take some of these innovative ideas and turn them into a product that will make things better, faster, cheaper, and hopefully safer. One of the things that I happen to be spending a lot of my time on right now is drones, and you can't pick up a copy, again, of the Wall Street Journal or industry trade magazines without reading something about drones. Gartner last year took an official position where they said as drones are getting more applications in logistics, logistics leaders should look into how these can provide value into their warehouses, and we feel like this is not really moving very fast just yet, but there are companies working at this. UPS just delivered last week their first package to a Boston area island. It was a test, of course, and the conditions were very favorable to something like this. But they actually did a real delivery where somebody ordered a package and it was delivered accordingly. When you think about drone delivery, I hope everyone can see this video streaming over the internet, but this is a more realistic idea of what drone delivery might look like. This is DHL's approach to drone delivery, where instead of somebody delivering to your doorstep or delivering to your front porch or to your deck or wherever you traditionally think of packages being delivered, this is what's called a Parcelcopter and a Skyport, where drones would go back and forth to a very particular location, and that's actually where you come to pick up packages. And so we sort of feel like this is the first step in the evolution of drone delivery. But drones are actually working inside the warehouse in a very limited form. These are two recent examples, and one company, the one on the right, at least the one on my right, is a South African company called DroneScan that has come up with an indoor drone scanning solution where you can actually do inventory scanning. They've integrated with a WMS system, and so the idea is that jobs that traditionally put people up on scissor lifts and very unsafe type things to do scanning can be done with this drone. This is an example of me working with an early generation portion of their technology. If you want to see what I look like, that's me in the blue hat. And I'm actually manually flying the drone, and we're scanning large bales of paper in one of our warehouses. And this is a very unique situation. There were no obstacles. These are very large objects. The scan reads were very easy. The barcodes obviously are very visible. The scanning is taking place. In this particular model, it's getting downloaded to an SD card, which we would then later upload to a WMS system, but that actually is happening a little bit more real time now. But this is an example of a drone actually in operation today, and they've actually worked with several customers already to implement these solutions inside the warehouse. Another company that we are talking to, Pink Solutions, has an indoor scanning solution. Instead of using optical readers, they're actually taking real-time high-resolution photographs and using OCR technology to do their scan, which allows them to process numbers in addition to barcodes. This is kind of an example of what the computer sees while the drone is flying in real time. This is an example of another project that I'm working on. This is actually behind our headquarters, where we are testing a drone that scans RFID tags that would normally be attached to trailers out in a yard. And so in real time, this is doing a scan from about 27 feet, collecting that tag information and communicating it back in real time to a cloud-based yard management system. You can see an operator down there in the corner, but what's interesting is he's just there for safety purposes. This drone is flying a predetermined path, or a mission as we like to call it, where you click a button, the drone takes off, it does its path, and it returns back to the location where it took off from. There are a lot of limitations to this, battery life and FAA rules here in the United States, weather conditions, these sorts of things, but this is an area that we feel like has a lot of promise. We certainly don't suggest any of our customers today rush out and purchase these solutions because they still have a ways to evolve, but this is something that we expect to see a lot of in the next couple of years. If you want to see a little bit more about, I could talk for days about drones. It's an area that I've spent a lot of time on. And actually JDA is going to bring me to their Focus Connect conference in London in early November, where I'm going to talk in a lot more detail about drones. So if anybody's interested, they can get in touch with Danny. These are the dates. Direct digital manufacturing. This is the idea. This is another project that we're working on where you would potentially use 3D printers instead of the traditional supply chain model of having goods manufactured in a particular location, having those shipped to the warehouse, and where it would wait for a customer to actually order that. or a distribution or a vendor to order that product and then have it shipped a second time. This is the idea of actually printing finished goods at the 3PL location or at your distribution center and having the goods shipped out from there. Obviously, this is something that would be limited to certain types of products, but UPS is already doing that today in conjunction with a company they acquired called Cloud DDM. These are carbon fiber parts that are being produced in mass numbers on demand as they need them and shipped accordingly. And as 3D printing technology continues to advance, which is almost happening at a weekly basis, not a monthly basis, but a weekly basis, we see so much potential coming out of this and how fast this is moving. This is an area that our customers really want us to stay on top of. Augmented reality or virtual reality are two things that you see a lot about, and in this video you can see Microsoft's approach to this. This is a consumer-based product, but we see a lot of applications with augmented reality in the logistics space. As you watch this video that again was designed for consumers and certain types of design houses, the idea here is that people are wearing these augmented reality glasses and using them to help augment their job, to help them see data in a different way, and to use that data to hopefully be more creative and to maybe even save time and money. This is an example of some mock-ups of what we see augmented reality being used in the warehouse, where potentially a forklift driver could use this to help tell them where to go, or in training where they could actually teach them how to use a complicated piece of equipment where they would put the augmented reality glasses on, sit inside of the device, and as they looked around, they could actually see what they needed to do. Or an order picker could use this to guide them through the warehouse and show them exactly where something needed to go. Kenco Innovation Labs was able to get into Microsoft's testing program early, and we came up with some simple ideas. We're not programmers per se, but we came up with a simple safety training video, and if you can see this is one of our conference rooms where we created an augmented reality safety video where you start the training by putting on these glasses, you follow this guy around, and you identify one of 8 different safety violations. This is spilled product on the floor, and you would point to that and say, this is the first product that I found. And as you can see, the hand of our operator there, he's done a virtual click on that, and so they found that slip hazard. And as you watch the video, this guy will disappear, and we will, in real time, walk around the room, around these racks, and actually look for other safety violations. So you can see this box. This was a safety violation. This was a safety violation. Yet another safety violation. Heavy boxes on top of a rack. And so this is just a very rudimentary example of some of the things that augmented reality can do inside the warehouse. We have one idea where we're actually working with master technicians for forklift repair can use these to help each other in multiple locations work through some very complicated repairs. And finally, another thing that we're working on right now is an accelerator with a local venture capital company called Lamppost Group here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where we're located. But Dynamo was a international competition where they invited hundreds of startups doing work in the logistics space to come to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where we're located, and to further explore their ideas. And so we had a couple hundred applicants. We chose 10, and Kenco is one of the sponsors and one of the mentors of this program. We're helping very early stage companies develop new leading edge innovative technologies that hopefully will be for sale in the logistics space very soon. Finally, we do education. So what good is it if we can't actually share the information, the prototype results, and the research with other people? And so we'll do webinars, we'll speak at conferences. Customers or people that aren't even our customers are beginning to call us because they've seen some of the blog postings that we've written, and they want us to come talk to them about innovation, specifically innovation as it relates to logistics. These are just an example of some of the things that we've been working on lately. But ultimately, what are some things that you can take away from this discussion, right? What are hopefully some things that you've learned from just a few minutes that I've had with you? A corporate culture of innovation is something that's very important, and again, this is another topic that I could talk about for hours because people ask us this all the time. What are some things that we can do to have a more innovative culture from the top down. Since I did the presentation, I put one of my own quotes up here. So a healthy corporate culture allows for employees to see a problem clearly and to provide the talent, resources, and management to solve it. And this is what we do in our Innovation Lab. The Innovation Lab sits at the center of these departments and is the first focal point where new ideas come to as we start to figure out how to develop these ideas out and share them with our customers. We encourage bottom-up innovation. This is the idea of people from all across the company, from a forklift driver to the CEO of the company, can have a vehicle to submit ideas that end up in our group. We also think it's a good idea to allow some people to have unstructured time where they can explore and experiment with new ideas. This obviously is something that's worked very well for Google. We don't expect third-party logistics providers or our customers to give 20% of somebody's time on an annual basis to this, but this is something that's worked for Google, and we do encourage companies to allow their employees to use some of their unstructured time to explore new ideas. Redefining how your employees are measured to encourage them to spend time looking at innovative new approaches on how to solve the worst problems in a company. And finally, another thing that we talk about is a reporting structure. You know, we've talked to a lot of innovation labs, and what we have found out is that having an innovation group or an employee report directly to the top brass is the best way for this to work. And again, I could talk for a long time about why that is. Some companies' innovation reports to IT, and some it reports to research and development. But for us, the way to really have autonomy and to really be creative and to develop ideas is to report directly to the top. And also to try to avoid this. I'm sure each of you can identify with an org chart like this a little bit, where you've had some great ideas that have gone nowhere. For us, having an innovation department was a way to avoid this. And so finally, with just a couple of more slides here as I try to wrap up, Henry Ford, we have this quote in our office, in our innovation lab. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And it's wise and silly at the same time, because the idea is that customers don't always know what they want. Steve Jobs was famous for this, is that you had to show people what they wanted. And the idea here for innovation in our innovation lab is we can't always ask people what they want. We have to show them new ideas that they haven't seen before and help let that create conversations that lead us to helping them with their problems. And so finally, on my last slide here, complex supply chain solutions require creativity and innovation. And for us, the creation of Kenco Innovation Labs was the way to respond to that. And so with that, Halim and Danny, I'll turn it over to you guys. I guess we're going to leave a little bit of time for questions.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, that's exactly it. We can dive right into questions. Thanks again for your presentation. Lots of material covered there, lots of really interesting things you guys are clearly doing at Kenco. But I was going to dive right in. The term buzzword got thrown around quite a bit by both of you guys. And so I was going to start with a question here on, so everyone right now in the 3PL industry is talking about innovation, seems like a buzzword. How should we think about real innovation versus some enhancements to existing processes? Danny, do you want to take that one to start?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. So that's a good question, and it's true, and that's what Matt just said. Innovation is a very, very used word already in the industry, or across all industries. But I think when I think about real innovation, it's also tied to the value that is eventually going to be delivered. Is it an incremental value, or does it have strategic importance for the logistics provider, and also especially for the customers? If the customer doesn't see the value, then it's not as good, right? And so I think it's based on the value proposition. It's based on a strategic importance. It's based on the value that the customers will receive. And obviously, it's not just some cosmetic changes or rebranding of the common ways of doing business. So we have to be careful not to embarrass ourselves, to position ourselves as being innovative, where it truly is not seen as innovative. So it is truly in the eye from the customer perspective, in my opinion. So Matt, I don't know if you want to comment further.
Yeah, that's great, Danny. I'll add a few other ideas to that. So in our innovation group, again, you'd have to sort of distinguish between R&D and innovation. So R&D, our engineering group, tends to be solutions available today. With innovation, we're thinking 1, maybe up to 3 years out. So a lot of the ideas that we have and that we're asked to talk about in research are not things that you could go out and buy today, like drones. And so one of the things that we have, that our customers, when we started the group, we didn't realize this, but what they're asking us now is coach us on the future. What sort of things do we need to be on the lookout for? What sort of things do we need to be aware of as things move forward? And so that's one thing that our group has done. We'll have quarterly business reviews, and customers will invite us to their offices and say, come give our management team a 1-hour presentation of where you think the future of logistics are going and what sort of things directly related to supply chain do we need to stay on top of. And so, that was a little bit of a surprise to us because we're not necessarily showing current value, but we're helping them understand future value.
It's transformational, right, Matt? I think that's the word I was looking for in my response. Yeah.
Exactly.
Kelly?
Yes, I mean, one of the questions I was actually going to ask, just speaking to what Matt was saying there, was you mentioned 1 to 3 years out is sort of the core target area that you're looking at research right now. But how do you measure that ROI? And I guess you mentioned one example there in terms of working with the customers closer, having them ask you to get more involved with you. But Danny, I wondered if you could chime in as well to sort of spell out how is innovation actually delivering value or increased revenue to businesses?
Yeah, that's another good question, right? So it is difficult to invest in innovation if we don't get the sense of what the ROI is and what the value is. And in fact, Matt, you and I were talking about this earlier, right? But truly, some part of innovation is what Matt just mentioned earlier. It is about showing the potentials for the future, and it's not just a potential for what you can realize in 1 week or month or even a year time, but what is the potential for the business or for the customer, 2-3 years down the road? What does it enable? But really there could be some metrics, and there are some metrics that have been reported out there. Whether it's coming from it's in the form of improved accuracy, especially when we think about the use of the smart glasses as an example, reduced training time. So easier ramp up for especially new employees in the warehouse, and I think safety is a big benefit as well, right? But there could be a lot more. So especially when it's not necessarily a technological innovation, it could be process innovation. So I think the benefits could expand into even inventory turn or inventory working capital impact and so on. So I think there are some real metrics that are resulting from innovations, and it's out there. But we need to think about this metrics or this benefits from 2-3 years down the road, because truly the investment required for some of these innovations would just take that long to implement.
I'll throw one other angle at that, Danny. It's a little bit different take, a little bit out there, but hey, that's what we do in our group, right? What we come across every once in a while is a customer that, oddly enough, everybody's always interested in ROI, right? They're looking to save money, but sometimes their tolerance for trying something new, they've got a little bit of a budget they want to work with, and so they'll actually talk to us about working with ideas that don't have an immediate payoff. In fact, if anything, it may actually cost them money initially. And the idea is really two things. One is that we want to be seen as an early adopter of efficiency. And so, that might resonate with other departments within a company. It might tell a story. There have been different reasons why people wanted us to work with them on that. But we have found in a handful of customers, their tolerance for not having an immediate ROI was surprisingly large. Another idea, or another thing that I've heard from one customer in particular, is that if we spend $75,000 on this particular innovative prototype with the solution, Matt, that you and your team have come up with, hopefully what that might do is solve the problem it was designed to solve, but also serve as an inspiration to other parts of the company, and other employees to be more innovative about some of the departments they're responsible for. So it's really more of a showcase type project than it was an actual return project. And so, I always like working with those customers. They're sort of fun to work with, but that was sort of a surprise. I always felt like in our space with thin margins, unless it had a ROI, nobody was interested in doing it. But we're finding that with some of the really interesting things coming out now, people are really to expand their definition a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, one of the questions that I've seen come up quite a bit, and you sort of touched upon a little bit there, is sort of how does the relationship develop between the customer and yourselves in terms of sharing ideas, sharing input on developing innovations. I guess both Danny and Matt can speak to that, but maybe I'll hand that to Matt first to tackle.
So, what's been interesting, and again, completely unexpected when we started our group, is we really felt like our group was just going to be serving ourselves internally, our sales department, and new and existing customers. But we got thrown a curveball about 6 months ago when a large Fortune 100 company called us up out of the blue and said, will you come speak to us about innovation? And we were sort of surprised because we didn't know how they'd heard of us. I think they'd read a blog posting that I think I had written at some point. And, that turned into a conversation, which I think is going to turn into an RFP. And so that was sort of an interesting thing, Hallie, where, it wasn't us as a 3PL and our current competencies. It was what our future forward-thinking approach was to things that actually sparked the conversation. So, that was something that really surprised us. And so working with current customers to kind of get to answering your question directly, in quarterly business reviews, we'll go through, it'll be a day-long presentation. We'll talk about finance, we'll talk about operations, we'll talk about engineering, we'll talk about safety. But when we get to that innovation piece, that's the part that people really, really have a lot of interest in, and they come back to us afterwards and say, next time when we do this, can we put this at the beginning of the day instead of the end of the day, because we felt like we got cut short, and next time we don't want that to happen.
And Danny, what about with working with you guys at the JDA lab? How does that collaboration work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So from the JDA lab standpoint, so either the customers work with us or inquire about a problem. And this often actually comes from the logistics providers because they have the relationships directly with the customers, and they're trying to solve those problems directly with the customers. So they would come to us and inquire about, hey, this is a new problem that we haven't seen before in the past, and it might require some additional brainstorming, or even, completely new solutions, new creative solutions, whether it involves new machine learning algorithm, as we call it in the JDA lab. So from our data science perspective, or the application of or integrating with existing tools and technologies. But our JDA Labs is definitely designed just to do that, to brainstorm, to discover, research, and prototype solutions.
All right, we're quickly heading into overtime in terms of the webinar here, so I was going to drop one last question in here for you guys to tackle, and that's a bit of a forward-looking one. So data has really defined logistics technology over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, and as we move sort of, well into the data age, where should logistics companies be innovating in next in the data space specifically? Danny, do you want to grab that one first?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first one is there's a lot of data out there, and I do believe that logistics providers have a lot of data based on the services that they offer and that they provide to the customers. So first thing first is to leverage the existing data and how they can use those data to deliver to develop insights that make sense, that are of value to their customers. So whether it's in the form of maybe inventory policies or replenishment frequency, new sort of network configuration, right, and more. And then we've seen that, in fact, some leading 3PLs that take it even further to provide services around managing the inventory and promotions especially. So that's one area. But the next space, I think, is to be able to leverage big data in practical manner. In fact, some of our data scientists in JDA believe that it's big data only if you think about it, it's big data, but you can actually subset them into smaller data that makes sense and practical at the same time. So, Matt, you want to comment?
Yeah, I'll just Dan, you actually said a lot of the things that I wanted to say, but I'll add one other thing. When you think about the idea of the Internet of Things, the idea that small devices located around your warehouse have the potential to collect data, but the question is then what are you going to do with it, right? We hear terms about big data, and we don't have enough time in this conversation to kind of go into kind of how that would play out in logistics, but I think that we've got a lot of data points around a warehouse, whether that is data directly coming out of our forklifts to data coming out of scanners. We actually have been experimenting with some data regarding temperature and lighting in a warehouse as it relates to some energy studies that we've been working on. But ultimately, data isn't anything unless you are able to aggregate it and do something with it. And so, working with your IT departments and with business intelligence, exploring what you can do with some of this is something that that we really try to help internally help our group stay on top of. I know that's not very specific, Hallie, to your question, but the Internet of Things, again, we could have an entire webinar on the Internet of Things and what to do with that data. But that is something that I would encourage all of you to go out and research a little bit because that's going to be a big answer to what we do with some of this in the future.
Yeah, I think the value is really. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I can tell this webinar so far has been successful because in the last 8 minutes, Danny, I've gotten 12 LinkedIn requests from people in the logistics business.
Yeah, I was going to say, but in addition to that, in the IoT, I think the value of the data is really to provide that automatic response. So how can we leverage all of those data so that it goes somewhere into a hub, and that's what we were saying in JDAs and in an intelligent hub, that automatically just analyze and process them and deliver a prescriptive response as opposed to waiting for someone to manually think and look and analyze those data manually. I think that's where the opportunity is in the future, is really to provide that automatic response back to the execution that is optimal and of value to everyone.
I think we've got the next theme for our next webinar. Listen, on that note, I really wanted to thank Matt and Danny for their contributions today. I will be sending out the recordings after the fact, and of course their contact information is in those slides, so you can reach out to them directly there. Thanks again as well to the audience for tuning in. It's been a pleasure. Thank you again.